Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of this GraphQL video. And in this one we're going to talk more about consuming the GraphQL API. And we're going to be focusing on using sort of the standard, which is the Apollo client inside of a React project. But we'll go through the documentation in a moment. But again, I have my server running with our books API. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up another terminal. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is create a React project. Using the vite generator, npm init vite. Okay, and we'll just call this front end GraphQL, and I want a React project. Okay, cool. So I made that. CD into the front end. I want to do a quick. We'll do that. npm install all the basic libraries while we go take a look at the documentation. Okay, so Apollo client. Okay, so Apollo client is a library that you can use not just in React, but in any library to make API calls. They do have special bindings for, or special hooks for using it in React to make it using it in React easier. But they do have it for other libraries too. Like if you scroll down here, you can see like the community has made versions of it for Angular, Vue, Svelte, Ember, Meteor, you know, Apollo web components. So there's Apollo elements, so that can be used in anything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is like it's accessible, regardless. But again, you can also use like Relay and other GraphQL libraries as well. But let's get started. Okay. So basically, we are going to do this with React. Okay. And first what we'll do is we'll just kind of do, what the way this tutorial works is that they go over just how to use Apollo client to begin with, which I think is worth taking that first step first. So you can see like, hey, if I didn't want to use the special React version, I just want to use Apollo client as it is, how would I do that? So essentially what you do is we have to install Apollo client. So that's this library here. And then you have to install the GraphQL library because that's what has like those little like tag template literals that we can use to parse our queries. So let's do that. I'm going to copy this, bring it back over to VS Code, and npm install paste. Okie dokie. Okay, so now that's installed. So what we should do now is take a look what we're going to do. Okay. So first what we're going to do is we have to initialize the client. So the idea is what's going to happen is you're creating this object called the client. And the client already knows you're going to tell it, say, hey, this is where my API is running. And so that way it'll handle all the making the post requests and putting everything in the right place. All you have to do is pass it the query. That's essentially like the idea here. The idea is to simplify and abstract that whole having to make a post request and basically what I kind of did at the end of the previous video. So let's go to our front end app, which should have, let me just double check, make sure that that got installed. Good. Okay, and let's get our backend app running. Our front end app running, npm run dev. Okay, and I know that's the case because I can see it right there that it's the dev script. Okay, so it's running on localhost 3000. So let's open up a browser window on localhost 3000. Okay, there we go. That's all fine and good. Okay. So I'm going to head over to index.js. Let's find that, index.js. Oh, well, in this case, it's going to be main.js because this is not the standard React template. Okay. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to import all this stuff. So I can just copy that from here. Okay. Essentially, this is the object that where we can use to instantiate a Apollo client. This is an object that will automate some saving of queries in your cache. And then we'll come back to these when we get to the React side of things. Okay, cool. So first thing we're going to do is initialize the React client. I'll do that below this whole React DOM.render thing. Actually, I'm going to do it above. You'll see why in a little bit. But we're going to say const client equals new Apollo client. Okay, new Apollo client. And then what you do is you have to provide it the URI for your API. So that's the http://localhost 4000. That's where our API is. Okay, so that's good. And then we're going to say, hey, for caching purposes, use this new in-memory cache object, which, again, there are other ways you can do this, but that's how we're going to do it for now. It's the simplest way to do it, and it'll just basically cache it in the client's memory, so in their browser memory. Cool. Okay, so that we created a client. That's simple as that. Okay. Now, if we want to do a query, then the client has a function built in called query. So we'd be like client, okay, client.query. And then in here, what you would do is you would just pass in the query. So you would say query, okay, and then basically you would use the GQL template tag. And then let's go borrow our, go back to, I'll just borrow the same query from our index.html, which is this. Okay, we would paste that query there. Okay, we can see it's already working. Okay, oh no, that's the wrong page. Let me open up the DevTools here. Okay, right now that's all kind of being angry, so let's go back to over here. Cool. But that will do that. Let me just read that error though. Uncaught invariant violation must contain a query definition. Let's see here. Fresh. Invariant, yes. GraphQL. There's anything I missed from this? So we have an object. Oh, this gotta be wrapped in an object. Well, it isn't an object. Object query GQL, and then we're supposed to do .then result console.log results. Okay, I think it's because this is not a query, this is a mutation, so I think that's what it's complaining about. So if I remember right, okay, if I just were to write a query, it would be books, and then it would be like title author, if I remember correctly. Yep, and that worked. Okay, because see, so basically it would have been client.mutation if I wanted to run that other mutation. Okay, but client.query, and then you can see here, this is what we get back. Then see these three properties: data, loading, network status. Okay, and inside of data, there's the data from the query, so it's always named after the query that we did. So inside data, there's a property called books that has all the response from the books query. Because that way, there are ways you can actually make multiple queries at the same time. So that way you can actually have them under different names, depending on all the different queries you ran. Cool. So that's essentially how that would work. But we can make it easier for React, right? Okay, so let's delete this. That was all fun and good. Now, the way this is going to work is a lot like React Router, where React Router has a provider component, and then basically you can then use Router in other components because the provider is at the top of the chart. So what we're going to do here is that's what this Apollo provider component is. So we're going to say Apollo provider. Okay. And then we have to say client equals client. And then we just have to wrap all of this inside of that, like that. Okay, make sure that the comma's after the Apollo provider, separating the two arguments to React DOM render. Okay, so now this is going to enable, so now if I should be able to see that in my React DevTools. Components, and see there I can see the Apollo context provider. Nice. Okay. So basically what I'm doing is I'm passing the client down and making the client available. And then what's going to happen, there's going to be a hook that'll expect that provider to be there, and we'll be able to kind of grab the client to make the query for you. Okay, so now that that's there, okay, what I'm going to do is just create a new component. Let's go to app.jsx. I'm gonna just delete all this. We don't need all this. Okay, we don't need that. So in app.js, what we would do is from a public query, so I'll just copy this. I don't need all that, but I don't need this now because that was just for that main file. But I do want these two things. Use query and GQL and okay. So basically the way it would work, like any React hook, you have to use it inside. Okay, so we'll say const result equals use query. And then inside use query, you would say GQL. And then here you would paste the query. So once again, I would be like, you know, books, title, author. Okay, and then we can, if I go to app, I should see it in state a little bit. So you see there's the query state. And I can go in there, there's the base query. Okay, let's see if we can find the data. Execute. Previous options, query, kind, missions. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff in there you can explore if you really want. Okay, here we go. Result, data, books. Okay, and it's getting the books. Okay. So that's working. Okay. Let's kind of skip down to that example so we can see that. Okay. And again, one thing you could do is you could save these queries in a variable. So I could have done this. I could have been like, you know, const get books equals, cut this out, just put that over here, and then pass get books into here. So that way that cleans it up, and I can see, hey, I know I'm using this get books query. I could do that, and it works. Okay, once again, if I go in the app, I can see, look, there it is. It's fine. Now what happens is that when I do this const result, let's console log the result so we can see sort of like what we get back. Console.log result. Okay, and see, here's what we get back. So you get back this big object here. With client, data, error, fetch more, loading, previous. So the couple of ones I really want to point out here is data. That's where your data is. Okay. Then there's error in case there's like an error. Then there's loading in case it was still loading. So that way you know like, hey, is this API call still going? Okay, and then there's refetch, which is a function for you to redo the API call if you need to. So you don't have to sit there and make a separate function for that. It'll just give that to you, and you can just run that refetch function whenever you need. Update query if you need to like modify the query for some reason. Just a couple other really cool little tools in there. So typically what you would do is that instead of doing this like whole result thing, what you do is you'll destructure the following. You'll say, okay, get me loading, get me error, and get me data. Okay, so that way you can sit there and say, okay, if, okay, so you can do something like, or we can just do it as a ternary operator. So we can say, if loading is true, or if, we'll just do it as an if statement. If loading, okay, if loading, return, and I think we can do it on one line, return H1 loading. Let's see, does it not like that? Let's refresh the page. No, that's fine. Okay, yeah, because I was pretty sure you could do that on one line like that. Okay, and then if error return h1 error. Okay. Okay, and then here we can then now do a map. So we can just say data dot, use console log data so I can remember what's in there. Console log data. Books. So it's an object with books inside of it. So cool. So really what I want to do is do like data dot books dot map, and that would just be like B for book, and then all we want to do is just return an h1 with b dot title, and see, there we go, I have all the data. Okay, but again, if it was loading, if it was going to have an error, I can control for those situations and be prepared because it gives me everything I need for that. And again, I could also get that refetch function if I wanted to have the ability to refetch. Okay, I think like this is running over and over again, so I'm going to close that out. Cool. And that is basically how you would do that. And it's the same idea. So again, we saw how you could do it without the React components by just doing like, you know, client.query or client.mutation. That will work in anything JavaScript wise. So it doesn't matter what you're using framework wise. But if you're using React, you can use Apollo client and you get these kind of cool features, this nice hook, which makes like using this quite a bit easier. So yeah, that's how you use GraphQL on the back end and the front end. Not too bad, right? Okay. Have a great day. Enjoy. And again, there's other cool GraphQL libraries to check out as far as like grabbing them on the front end. So again, GraphQL client libraries. I know there's a lot of hype for Relay, so try that out. But let's go back to the article we read before. We can find it. Nope, not that one. This one. So like here's like the list. So if you're wondering like, oh, what are there alternatives to Apollo? Is that what I have to use on the front end? Not at all. You have all these different choices. Okay, let's see if it shows us some samples. Okay. So here's like how it would look like with fetch QL. Okay, so like see, so new fetch QL, you pass it the URL, then you pass it the query. And there you go. GraphQL request. They kind of all look the same so far. None of these look particularly different. Since React.component. Cool. That doesn't look all too different. So it's all kind of the same idea. Now how about Relay? Let's take a look at, I want to see a sample of Relay. Let's take a look at how this looks. Okay. .create. Type JSON stringify query operation.text. Okay. Not quite obvious to me what's going on there, but I'm sure it's cool. But yeah, those are some other libraries you can use other than Apollo client if you wanted to. Also, to be aware that there's things like Prisma. So let's take a look at these. Prisma, which is a way of like creating a GraphQL API pretty easily. Okay, so essentially what this is going to do is that you just write these models and it'll just generate the whole API for you. Like it makes generating a GraphQL API like really easy. Also same thing with Hasura. Okay, that's another tool. So again, as far as creating the backend piece, these pieces kind of like take all the work out of it. So that way all you have to do is worrying about building your front end. And then there's also Keystone JS. Those are the three off the top of my head. Okay, and then this one again gives you like a full-on like dashboard to create your website and stuff like that. And then I also think this is what I'm thinking of, JavaScript headless CMS. There's one that always comes up. Well, then there's headless CMS, like Graph CMS, that will deliver their data through GraphQL APIs. So so you can use that as well. Okay, so there's several different headless CMSs that do that, but there's Strappy. That's what I'm thinking of. Strappy is another self-hosted headless CMS, and yeah, again, you would just use a graphical interface to create your API, and you just consume it from your front end. Okay, so there's a lot of ways to get a GraphQL API versus other than just building it yourself with Apollo client. I like building my things myself because I like having that level of control. But the benefit of using, especially like hosted services, like a lot of these headless CMSs, like Graph CMS, is you don't have to deal with like scaling and infrastructure and all that stuff and deployment. The API just is there. So you have options, lots and lots of options. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcode.com. Join the Slack and Discord community over there at devnurse.com. Subscribe to this channel. Follow me on Twitter at alexmercedcoder. I'll see y'all next time.